August 1st, 1967, Newport, Kentucky. Inside the mahogany-lined offices of the George Wiedemann Brewing Company, a pen met paper. For the Wiedemann family, this wasn't just a business transaction. It was a desperate act of salvation. After 97 years of fierce independence, 4 generations of blood, sweat, and Bavarian tradition were being handed over to the G. Heilemann Brewing Company. The family was told it was a rescue. They were told that to survive the national giants, the Budweisers and the Millers, they needed a protector. They thought they were securing the futures of their 800 workers. They thought they were preserving a 113-year-old legacy. They were wrong. What the Wiedemanns didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that this rescue was actually a slow-motion execution. The very company that promised to save them was the one that would eventually pull the trigger. At its peak, Wiedemann was a titan. It was the largest brewery south of the Ohio River. It produced nearly 1 million barrels of beer annually. It was the heartbeat of a city. But 16 years after that fateful handshake, 800 jobs would vanish. A historic 5-acre cathedral of industry would be reduced to a pile of red bricks and broken glass. How does growth kill you? How does success become a death sentence? Today, we go behind the iron gates of the old money brewing elite. We'll uncover how a German immigrant built an empire from nothing, how his descendants gambled with bootleggers during Prohibition to keep the lights on, and how, in the end, the cold, hard math of corporate consolidation erased it all from the map. This is the story of the fall of Wiedemann, a story of ambition, betrayal, and the terrifying truth about what happens when a family legacy meets a corporate spreadsheet. Because the pattern we're about to see, it isn't just history, it's happening right now, in your town, to your industry. The rescue has begun, but is it an execution? Every empire starts with a single, stubborn dream. For the Wiedemanns, that dream stepped off a ship in New York Harbor in 1854. His name was George Wiedemann. He was 21 years old, a German immigrant with nothing in his pockets but a skill learned through the grueling Old World apprenticeship system in Eisen, Germany. George wasn't just a laborer, he was a craftsman. He understood the chemistry of hops, the soul of yeast, and the patience of the lager. But America in the 1850s was a chaotic forge. George didn't settle. He worked in Brooklyn, then Louisville, then Cincinnati. He was a beer driver, then a foreman, and finally a brewmeister, a master brewer. By age 37, George knew the Cincinnati brewing scene was saturated. To build something that lasted, he had to look where others weren't. He looked across the Ohio River to Newport, Kentucky. In 1870, he partnered with an old friend, John Butcher. Butcher had a small 15-barrel-a-day operation. It was modest, it was safe, but George Wiedemann didn't do modest. He had a vision for a beer cathedral. By 1878, George made his move. He bought out Butcher for $28,000, a fortune at the time. He was 45 years old, and for the first time, he was the master of his own destiny. George didn't just want to brew beer, he wanted to build a statement. He commissioned a 5-acre complex at 6th and Columbia Streets. It was designed in the German Romanesque Revival style. It looked less like a factory and more like a fortress. 5-story brewhouses, 130-foot chimneys, and stables for 150 horses. This was the birth of old money in Newport. But George would never see the final stone laid. In 1990, at the age of 57, the architect of the empire died. He left behind a widow, 6 children, and a question that haunts every dynasty. Can the sons hold what the father built? The transition was seamless. Charles and George Jr. weren't just heirs, they were experts. Charles had studied at the Royal College of Bavaria in Munich. They brought European precision to American ambition.
By 1900, the numbers were staggering: 100,000 barrels a year, distribution reaching as far as Cuba in the Philippines. The bottling room was a mechanical symphony, clinking out 325,000 units every single day. But the Wiedemanns understood something modern corporations often forget. A brand isn't a logo, it's an identity. They created Royal Amber, marketed as America's only registered beer. It wasn't just marketing fluff, it won blind taste tests nationwide. The brewery became the heartbeat of Newport. If you lived in Newport, you either worked for Wiedemann or you lived next to someone who did. They built baseball parks for the community, they donated church bells that rang every Sunday. The family lived in a 17-room mansion designed by the same architect who built Cincinnati's music hall. They were the royalty of the region. They had achieved the American dream. But as the 1910s drew to a close, a shadow was falling over the country. A shadow that didn't care about quality, tradition, or family names. The Great Experiment was coming, and it was designed to kill everything George Wiedemann had built. January 16, 1920, the Volstead Act took effect. Overnight, the Wiedemann Empire became a criminal enterprise if they dared to produce their life's work. Across America, breweries were shuttering. The Wiedemanns tried to play by the rules at first. They made Quiz, a near beer with almost no alcohol. It was terrible. Nobody wanted it. Revenue plummeted. The massive beer cathedral was becoming a graveyard. Desperation makes for strange bedfellows. Enter George Remus, the king of the bootleggers. Remus was a legal genius turned criminal mastermind. He knew that medicinal alcohol was still legal. He needed a place to process his products. The Wiedemanns faced a choice: die with honor or survive in the shadows. They chose survival. For 6 years, the brewery lived a double life: Quiz in the front, real beer in the back. Remus provided the protection and the payoffs, but the law eventually caught up. In 1927, federal agents raided the fortress. The pillar of the community, 70-year-old Charles Wiedemann, was facing federal prison. That's when his son, Carl, the family's black sheep and horse racing enthusiast, did the one thing that would define his legacy. He took the fall. He claimed he acted alone. He served 8 months in federal prison to keep his father out. The brewery went silent. The gates were locked. For the first time in 57 years, the heartbeat of Newport stopped. December 5, 1933. Prohibition was repealed. The Great Experiment had failed, but it had left the brewing industry in ruins. The Wiedemanns were scarred. Carl was out of prison, but he was done with brewing. He wanted the racetrack, not the brew kettle. The family turned to H. Tracy Balcom Jr., George Sr.'s grandson. This was the era of the Great Rebuild. By 1938, the machines were humming again. By 1955, they weren't just back, they were bigger than ever. 850,000 barrels. They had survived a world war, a depression, and a federal prison sentence. They thought they were invincible. But while they were perfecting their recipes, the world was changing. A new weapon had been invented: the television. In the 1950s and 60s, the national giants started a new kind of war. It wasn't about who had the best beer, it was about who had the biggest advertising budget. Wiedemann was a regional king, but Budweiser was becoming a national god. The national brands started price wars. They would drop their prices in Newport just long enough to bleed Wiedemann dry, then raise them once the competition was weak. Richard Wagner, the great-grandson of the founder, saw the writing on the wall by 1967. The math was simple. stay independent and die slowly, or sell and survive. Wiedemann Brewing Company from Wisconsin offered a lifeline. They promised to keep the Newport plant open. They promised to grow the brand. It was a merger of equals, they said. On August 1, 1967, the Wiedemanns signed. The old money was cashed out. They thought they had saved the 800 workers. But in the world of corporate consolidation, there is no such thing as a rescue. There is only acquisition.
The Spreadsheet Execution, 1983. For 6 years, it worked. Production actually hit an all-time high of 1.4 million barrels. The workers were happy, the family was relieved. But in 1983, the honeymoon ended. Heilemann was now the 7th largest brewer in America. They had too many factories. They looked at a spreadsheet. Newport was 95 years old. It was inefficient. It was redundant. May 1983. The announcement was a lightning bolt. We are consolidating to strengthen our position. 800 workers, some whose grandfathers had worked for George Wiedemann himself, were told they were no longer necessary. They weren't people, they were overhead. They weren't a legacy, they were a manufacturing footprint. The last shift, the death of a cathedral. The end didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, agonizing strip down. One by one, departments went dark. Imagine being Robert Schmidt, a third-generation worker, 32 years on the floor. He walked the same path his father and grandfather did. On the last day, he ran his hand over the copper kettles. He wasn't just losing a paycheck, he was losing his family's history. At 3:30 p.m. on that final day in December 1983, the mechanical rhythm of the bottling line, the sound that had defined Newport for 113 years, stopped. The silence was deafening. Workers carried out lunchboxes filled with photos and memories. Some took a wrench or a bottle opener, a piece of the cathedral, to prove they were once there. 800 families went home to an uncertain future. The gates were locked. The lights were turned off. The empire was officially dead.
The last shift, the death of a cathedral. The end didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, agonizing strip down. One by one, departments went dark. Imagine being Robert Schmidt, a third-generation worker, 32 years on the floor. He walked the same path his father and grandfather did. On the last day, he ran his hand over the copper kettles. He wasn't just losing a paycheck, he was losing his family's history. At 3:30 p.m. on that final day in December 1983, the mechanical rhythm of the bottling line, the sound that had defined Newport for 113 years, stopped. The silence was deafening. Workers carried out lunchboxes filled with photos and memories. Some took a wrench or a bottle opener, a piece of the cathedral, to prove they were once there. 800 families went home to an uncertain future. The gates were locked, the lights were turned off. The empire was officially dead. The human cost, after the rubble. What happens to a city when its heart is ripped out? Newport learned the hard way. Property values collapsed, bars closed, families broke under the stress of unemployment. Robert Schmitz ended up stocking shelves at a retail store for 1/3 of his old wage. Mary Johnson, a single mother, had to uproot her kids to a rough neighborhood in Cincinnati just to survive. Tom Williams joined the military because it was the only job left with benefits, only to end up in a war zone years later. Narrator: Heilemann didn't care. They kept the Wiedemann name, they brewed the beer in Indiana, they slapped the W and Eagle logo on a product that no longer had a soul. But karma is a patient mistress. In 1991, the aggressive consolidation strategy failed. Heilemann went bankrupt. The predator became the prey. In 1995, the wrecking ball finally finished the job. The 5-acre beer cathedral was reduced to rubble. Today, it's just a patch of grass. There was a small revival in 2018, a craft brewery in Ohio using the Wiedemann name. It's good beer, it's a nice tribute, but it's not the empire, it's not the 800 families. The fall of Wiedemann teaches us one terrifying lesson. Consolidation is a lie. When a corporation says they want to save a local brand, they usually mean they want to harvest its organs. They privatize the profits and socialize the losses. They destroy communities to save a few cents per barrel. Look around you. This pattern is repeating today, in hospitals, in grocery stores, and in your own workplace. The rescue is coming. The question is, are you ready for the execution? Because once the legacy is gone, it never comes back. All that's left is the grass growing over the bricks.